I am Lynden Miller, and I have been a public garden designer for many years in New York, working to beautify my city. I have also experienced firsthand what happens when a city fails to maintain its public spaces. In the 1970s, New York was in a fiscal crisis and cut the funds for the maintenance of 1,700 parks. It all went downhill quite fast, and the city streets, as well as the parks, looked pretty bad. A bunch of private citizens decided to form the Central Park Conservancy in 1980 and raise private money to fix Central Park in particular. My friend Betsy Rogers was in charge of restoring Central Park, and she said to me, "I think you should get up there and restore this neglected formal garden at 105th Street and 5th Avenue. It was all overgrown. There were bottles on the ground, trash bags floating around. There was graffiti on all the buildings. And not only had it been listed in the New York Times as one of the 2 places most avoided, but it did seem dangerous because there was no one in there. But it was also a very romantic place. It had beautiful bones, as they say in the trade. And I went to friends in the neighborhood, and invariably they said, "You're crazy, you can't do this. People, they'll trash it." Fortunately, I just didn't pay any attention to them. This beautiful place deserved the very best that I could give it. The Conservatory Garden had a celebration in April 1983 for the beginning of its restoration. And by that July, it was already beginning to look pretty good. And suddenly, people began to dribble back in. The first time they come into this conservatory garden, their jaws drop. And then they say, I don't believe it. It couldn't be here. But the most touching part is that they always say they want to share it with someone. I was on my hands and knees working in one of the beds one day, and I saw this older woman come right to the edge of the bed, and I looked up and she said, "My goodness, we've been waiting years for you to get here." You don't make a garden without figuring out how to maintain it. I raised people's spirits and their hopes, and so I couldn't leave. I had to figure out how to take care of it. Maintenance is the thing that will keep people from feeling cynical about their public spaces. If it's fixed up, and then a few years later it goes back downhill again, that's not a good thing for a city or a community. I don't take any jobs unless I have a feeling that there's a commitment to maintenance. Learning how to take care of plants is an art form, and you need people who know what they're doing. Volunteers also need to be trained. Eventually, in time for the garden's 50th birthday, which was in 1987, I was able to raise an endowment of $1.5 million so that we could hire full-time professional horticulturists. The Central Park Conservancy invested the money and pays most of the costs of running the garden. The Conservatory Garden was where we learned a great truth about New Yorkers and city dwellers in general, and that is that human beings respond to beautiful things and help to take care of them. After Central Park began to be restored, people suddenly realized the importance and the excitement of this. It changed everything and changed New York forever. People from other institutions like Grand Central Station and the New York Public Library said, "We've got to fix up our places too." Bryant Park was directly behind the New York Public Library, and the people who were restoring the library realized that the park was the festering sore. 5 acres of degradation. The Parks Department wasn't taking care of it. Many New Yorkers would say not only would they not go near the park, but they wouldn't go anywhere in the neighborhood. And there was a drug-related murder in 1987, and Bryant Park was closed for 5 years. The people who were restoring Bryant Park said to me, "If you can do that in East Harlem, you better come down and do that here." I put gardens on either side of the main lawn. Just as they said, you can't do anything nice in the Conservatory Garden, they would say you can't possibly fix Bryant Park. But it was fixed, and people were thrilled. And the amazing thing that happened was, within a week, People who owned buildings in the surrounding area began to sell real estate that had been vacant for years. There was a study of the real estate around Bryant Park in 1999, and they found that the values had gone up 225% since the day the park opened. They covered the railroad tracks coming out of Grand Central Station all the way to 97th Street. And then they put landscaping there, and that's why it's called Park Avenue, and people like to live there. Well, they stopped at 96th Street. Everything above 96th Street was considered dangerous and uninhabitable. And between 96th and 97th was the worst compacted vacant lot, would be a polite name to describe it.
People couldn't even come outside to get some fresh air, and you couldn't go near this park. It was just awful.
The local city councilman got the capital money to restore this quarter of an acre. The Parks Department and I worked on the design, and we put in lots of places for people to sit. There are many seating walls as well as benches. I put in plants that are very easy to maintain because the Parks Department is so stretched that they would not have maintenance to keep this place up. Wonderfully, it's also affected the East Harlem neighborhood. There are little restaurants, little shops opening up around.
Really, it's amazing how a park like this could do so much for the area.
And it has been, in a microcosm, what Bryant Park and other places were for people who visit and also for the neighborhood. I got a call from a developer in a place called Red Hook, which is a part of Brooklyn that's very hard to get to. It's on the New York Harbor. This developer said, I have a small piece of land along the waterfront and I want to fix it up as a gift to the community where I own a lot of buildings, what turned out to be these gorgeous 19th century pier buildings. His name is Greg O'Connell. He's an ex-cop and drives a beat-up pickup truck. And we got along right away from the beginning. We put in about 1,000 plants, shrubs and perennials and some trees that do well right on the water. There's a little beach there. It's a most wonderful little place.
It's nice to have an oasis for the business people, the community, people visiting from other areas, whether it be poor folks or rich folks. They're all coming together here.
It showed the possibilities of this rather unknown part of Brooklyn. The ferry boats for the water taxi now come to Red Hook, and now there are all kinds of stores opening everywhere.
People want to be here.
And Red Hook is now on the map. And it all started with a little tiny piece of garden landscaping right on the water. I think it's important to remember that people need parks more than ever when things are difficult or there's a crisis. Parks are oases in good times and refuges in bad times. And in 2001, when the World Trade Center buildings came down, I got a call from a Dutch bulb grower that I had worked with for 25 years or more. And he said he wished there was something he could do for New York. And I said, Hans, you don't have any extra bulbs, do you? So it took about a week to organize, but at the end of a week, Hans had given to the city of New York 1 million daffodils. And they were planted by about 10,000 volunteers through New Yorkers for Parks. And people even came from other cities. I said to the Parks Commissioner, let's plant them in parks that haven't seen a flower in years. So that's what we did in all the 5 boroughs. We circled the city of New York with daffodils. The Daffodil Project has attracted attention around the country, and 15 other cities have inaugurated similar programs. It's been 10 years and we've planted 4 million daffodils. My goal is to plant one for every New Yorker. I do think that people need to advocate with their city governments to be sure that there's enough funding for public parks. Although private funds are important and have made a big difference, cities should really step up to the plate and take care of their public spaces. If our cities do not provide adequate funding to maintain the parks, which are not already privately funded, they will deteriorate. and so much of what we have gained over the last 30 years could be lost. When you fix things up like this, there are huge economic benefits. Good parks and good landscaping is, relatively speaking, very inexpensive. My motto is make it gorgeous, and they will come, and keep it that way, and they will help you. This kind of thing is not a frill. This is seriously changing the quality of life in a big city or in a community. There is an enormous power in a well-planted, well-maintained public place. The power to change the way people behave towards each other and the way people feel about their cities or their communities. And I think it's because all human beings need a connection with nature. Beautiful spaces are sanctuaries for the souls of city dwellers.